Olaf had been traveling down the Dnieper River for 3 weeks in the summer of 987. He was part of a group of 6,000 Norse warriors sailing toward Constantinople, the greatest city in the world. Prince Vladimir of Kiev had promised them to Emperor Basil II, who desperately needed fighters to crush a rebellion. The journey was long and dangerous. They portaged their boats around rapids and fought off bandits along the trade route. When they finally reached the Black Sea, Olaf could see the massive walls of Constantinople rising in the distance. The city's golden domes gleamed in the sunlight. It was larger than anything he had ever imagined. The Vikings were met by imperial officials who inspected them carefully. Only the strongest and most skilled warriors would be accepted into the emperor's service. Olaf passed the test. He swore an oath of loyalty directly to Emperor Basil, not to any Byzantine noble or general. This was different from service back home. The foreigners were paid more than native Byzantine soldiers and given better equipment. Olaf received a long-handled Danish axe and chainmail that gleamed like silver. The emperor wanted warriors who had no local political connections, men who would protect him without question. The Varangians, as they were called, became the most feared fighting force in the empire. On April 20th, 1042, Harald Hardrada stood guard in the great palace of Constantinople. He was commander of the Varangian Guard by then, wealthy and powerful after years of fighting for the empire. Emperor Michael V trusted him completely. That morning, riots had broken out in the city. Michael had made a terrible mistake. He had accused Empress Zoe of trying to poison him and sent her to a monastery with her head shaved like a criminal. The people loved Zoe, and they were furious. Harald watched as the riots grew worse. His loyalty was supposed to be to the emperor, but the Varangians served the imperial family, not just the man on the throne. When the mob stormed the palace through the emperor's box in the hippodrome, Harald did nothing to stop them. Michael fled by boat to a monastery, clinging to the altar and begging for sanctuary. The mob dragged him out anyway. Harald and his Varangians arrived at the monastery shortly after. The new rulers had given them orders. Harald personally carried out the sentence. Using a red-hot iron, he blinded Michael, pressing it into both eyes until the emperor screamed. It was Byzantine tradition for removing rivals from power. A blind man could not rule. Harald felt no guilt. Michael had imprisoned him weeks earlier on false charges. Now the emperor who had betrayed him could see nothing at all. On August 26, 1071, Basil stood in formation near the town of Manzikert in eastern Anatolia. Emperor Romanos IV had brought the army deep into Seljuk territory to reclaim lost fortresses. Basil was part of the Varangian contingent guarding the emperor at the center of the Byzantine line. Around them stood mercenaries from a dozen nations. The plan seemed solid at first. But as the afternoon wore on, everything fell apart. The right wing, commanded by generals who hated the emperor, suddenly retreated without orders. Then the left wing broke under waves of Turkish arrows. Basil and the other Varangians formed a tight circle around Romanos. They raised their shields as arrows fell like rain. When the Turkish cavalry charged, the Varangians swung their heavy axes with brutal efficiency. They cut down dozens of riders. But they were surrounded and outnumbered. One by one, the Varangians fell. Basil took an arrow through the neck and collapsed. The emperor fought on until his horse was killed beneath him and his sword hand was wounded. Finally, Romanos surrendered. The Seljuk Sultan treated the captured emperor with respect, but most of the Varangian guard lay dead on the field. The elite unit that had served emperors for 80 years had been nearly destroyed in a single afternoon. On November 15th, 1025, Sigurd rushed through the corridors of the Great Palace. Emperor Basil II had just died after a brief illness. Sigurd had served the emperor for 12 years, fighting Bulgarians and Arabs across the empire. Now the moment he had been waiting for had arrived. The Varangian Guard had a unique privilege called polutasvarf, or palace plunder. When an emperor died, the The guards could run to the imperial treasury and take as much gold and gems as they could carry in both hands. It was an old Norse custom that the Byzantines had accepted. Sigurd burst into the treasury room along with dozens of other Varangians. The chamber was filled with chests overflowing with gold coins, jeweled crowns, and silk robes embroidered with pearls. He plunged both hands deep into a chest of gold solidi. The coins were heavy and cold. He grabbed fistfuls and stuffed them into a leather bag he had brought. Other guards were doing the same, laughing and shouting. Some took gems the size of eggs. One man grabbed a golden cross studded with rubies. The new emperor, Constantine VIII, watched from the doorway with a resigned expression. This was the price of Varangian loyalty. Sigurd left the palace that night richer than any farmer or merchant in his homeland. When he finally returned to Norway years later, he built a stone house and commissioned a runestone to commemorate his service. His wealth encouraged more young Norsemen to make the journey south. On April 12, 1204, Edmund stood on the walls of Constantinople facing an impossible enemy. He was an Anglo-Saxon who had fled England after the Norman conquest 38 years earlier. Many English warriors had joined the Varangian Guard, seeking revenge against the Normans who had destroyed their homeland. Now those same Normans were attacking Constantinople itself. The Fourth Crusade had been diverted by Venetian merchants. Instead of fighting Muslims in the Holy Land, the Crusaders had turned on the Christian Byzantine Empire. Edmund watched as siege towers rolled toward the walls. The emperor had fled the city with his treasures, abandoning Constantinople. The Varangians remained loyal to the position of emperor even when the man himself had run away. They fought with desperate fury. Edmund swung his battle axe at crusaders climbing ladders. He split helmets and shattered shields. Beside him, other Varangians roared battle cries in English and Norse. But the crusaders kept coming. The Venetians broke through the harbor defenses first. Then the main wall was breached. Edmund and his companions retreated into the streets, fighting house to house. The Crusaders eventually surrounded them in a square near the Hagia Sophia. Edmund took 3 sword wounds before he fell. The last of the true Varangian Guard died, defending a city that had already been lost. Their loyalty to the imperial throne had become their death sentence. During a formal ceremony in the imperial palace in 1403, William stood guard behind Emperor Manuel II. He was one of the last English Varangians, part of a unit that had shrunk to barely a dozen men. The Byzantine Empire itself was dying. Turkish armies controlled nearly all of its former territories. Constantinople stood alone, surrounded by enemies. William had joined the Guard as a young man seeking adventure and wealth. But those days were long gone. The emperors had no money to pay foreign mercenaries properly. The palace plundering tradition had ended decades ago. Most warriors now served local lords or returned home. During the ceremony, William noticed something wrong. Several Byzantine nobles were whispering in the corner, glancing at the emperor. One of them was the emperor's own nephew. William recognized the signs of conspiracy from stories passed down through generations of guards. He stepped closer to the emperor and loosened his axe. That night, one of the conspirators tried to poison the emperor's wine. William knocked the cup from his hand. The conspiracy collapsed when the nephew fled the city rather than face arrest. The emperor thanked William personally, but there was sadness in his eyes. Everyone knew the empire would not survive much longer. William was the second-to-last Varangian to serve in Constantinople. After the Turks conquered the city in 1453, no trace of the legendary guard remained. The axes that once defended Roman emperors had fallen silent forever.